Hi, I'm Lanny, and this is Preserving Today. Okay, today I'm going to answer some of the most common questions I get about brewing Jun Kombucha. First, the most common question I get about brewing Jun Kombucha is, what is Jun Kombucha? First, of course, kombucha is a naturally fermented sweet tea. And conventional kombucha, and what most people are drinking or talking about when they say kombucha, is made with black tea and sugar. So you're sweetening black tea with sugar and then adding your starter culture, which is a SCOBY. This is a SCOBY. A SCOBY stands for symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast. This is a symbiotic organism that's made of bacteria and yeast, and the perfect ratio to be able to perform a fermentation process on your sweet tea and give you kombucha in the end. Not only does it give you kombucha, but it also reproduces, so it's going to grow another SCOBY on top of the previous SCOBY and perpetuate itself on and on, so you can start making more and more kombucha or start giving SCOBYs to friends or composting them or Googling what do I do with all my extra SCOBYs. Jun Kombucha is just the same, using a SCOBY and fermenting sweet tea, only we're using green tea and raw honey. Everything else is exactly the same. The difference between Jun Kombucha, spelled J-U-N, and conventional kombucha is the difference in the sweetener as well as the type of tea. Another really common question that I get about brewing Jun Kombucha is, what kind of green tea should I use? And the answer to that, from my opinion, is whatever green tea that you have access to. A lot of people are going to say to use a high quality green tea, to use a loose leaf green tea, to make sure it's fresh and not stale, to make sure it's organic, and all those things are great. But rather than a black and white, this is good, this is bad, I like to look at this big spectrum of what's acceptable to be able to maintain a SCOBY, keep it alive. And actually, based on how you're treating it, it's going to grow and develop and evolve in that environment, meaning that it'll be best suited for whatever way you're able to treat it. So as far as green tea, I started out using basic, cheap green tea bags from the grocery store. I eventually bumped it up to getting organic, but it was still like Newman's Own brand green tea. And now I'm using Little Red Cup tea, which is super good, really high quality, more expensive, imported from China, or also organic, and it's loose leaf, so I'm doing it by weight instead of by tea bags. I don't have the tea bag waste. It's really great. You can check them out at littleredcuptea.com. Another common question I get for brewing Jun Kombucha is, what kind of honey should I use? And again, we have a spectrum of acceptable, so we don't want to only shoot for perfection and then think we can't do the thing in our own house. That's my whole point of the reason I'm sharing my interests on my YouTube channel, is so that I can show you that things don't have to be done perfectly to be done. And actually, just getting started in whichever way you're able to is the best course of action, and then you'll grow with that. If you end up really liking brewing kombucha, of course you're going to try to figure out how to make it better, and then you can keep getting better things and better ingredients. I will say, if you're able to get a raw honey, that's what you want to do. Some people say that your SCOBY will not survive if you don't use raw honey, if you're using pasteurized honey, and that might be the case, but when I first started, I used cheap honey from Costco, and my SCOBY still survived, and I was still able to make Jun Kombucha, although it didn't have as great of a flavor as it does now that I'm using better honey. When available, I'm using local raw honey. The most cost-effective way to buy raw honey that I found is from Azure Standard, and I get it in a full gallon size thing. It's called their 12-pound container. I think it's about a gallon, and it's really good. They have different kinds. They have orange blossom honey, wildflower honey, blackberry, raspberry. And that's not a flavor of honey, that's actually what the bees are nearby and eating to make the honey, which does change the flavor. So if you don't know much about honey, look into it. It's a fascinating thing, and it does a great job feeding our Jun SCOBY. So use the best honey available to you and the best honey that you can afford. Maybe anything above the little packets you get with your biscuits at Popeyes will be good. Although, come to think of it, if you were in a pinch. All right, another common question that I get about keeping a Jun Kombucha is, when I'm brewing it, how do I know when it's done brewing in its initial ferment and ready to flavor and bottle for the second ferment? If everything I just said is foreign to you and you don't know, watch my other video first, how I brew, flavor, and bottle my Jun Kombucha, and that'll walk you through the step-by-step process that I do to brew my kombucha and to flavor it however I want to and to bottle it. This question though, how do I know when this initial ferment is done? It has one simple answer, and it's this nice little metal. People are gonna be mad that I'm putting metal into my kombucha. It's okay, guys. This is stainless steel. It's a stainless steel straw. It's what I use to taste my kombucha to see if it's ready. And that's it. You can have all of the different ways to measure, and the best one is only your taste and preference. So I could look at a calendar or a clock, I could look at the temperature in my house, and all these things are going to factor in. But the only deciding thing is how it tastes to me and if I think it's ready. So how I know it's ready is because it tastes a certain way. And this kombucha I just started, this one is finished. And the reason I know it's finished and ready to flavor and bottle is because I tasted it. So I just put my straw on and I cover it with my finger and then I taste it. It's so good. That tastes still sweet, but not too sweet. Some sourness, but not like vinegar. And it has this tingly effervescence, the magic that is hard to describe on my tongue. I know this is ready to now flavor if I want to and bottle. But one downside, or maybe it's an upside, in my opinion it is, to brewing kombucha or doing any kind of ferment, you're never gonna know for sure if it's the best it can be unless you wait for it to go too far and you ruin a batch. So you're gonna get to this point where it keeps getting better, and maybe it'll level off there for a minute and then it's gonna go downhill. That downhill is gonna mean this turns to vinegar. Most people don't want to just drink a bottle of vinegar. It's not gonna make you sick, but it's just not as enjoyable to drink, and it's not what most people are going for when they're brewing kombucha. So I recommend being okay with it. If you get to that point, you can leave it for longer and let it really turn into vinegar and use that kombucha vinegar to make salad dressings or marinades or anything else you would use vinegar for. But you're never gonna know for sure until you've had it before it's to the point and after it's to the point. And then you'll know, here's my window. And based on the temperature in your house and the time of year, it's gonna take different amounts of time. Also based on your tea and your honey and your SCOBY and all these things that we can't measure or even see with the naked eye. And so instead of focusing on all of these other details and just doing it just right, just taste it often. I recommend starting to taste this at about 7 days after it's been brewing, and then taste it again at 10 days. And then maybe in the winter you can space your tastings out a little farther. But how hard is it just to slip a cover off and sneak that straw in next to your SCOBY down a little ways and give it a taste. Just make sure the straw is clean before you put it in there and you're good to go. Another really common question that I get about brewing Jun Kombucha is what kind of bottles people should use when they're bottling for their second ferment. I used to be really strongly opinionated that people should only use fermentation grade swing top bottles. And really, I was never opinionated that people should. I was opinionated that I should. I was terrified that I was gonna break a bottle, and I thought this was the only thing strong enough to hold it. After fermenting for years and years and years, and doing lots of different kind of fermented beverages, I found that kombucha typically doesn't get too fizzy as long as you follow a couple of basic recommendations. I'm not gonna go over those completely today, but I will say there's other types of bottles that can work for bottling as well. It's not only these swing top bottles, although they're great and they're really pretty. So I do recommend having some of these at least, and I'll link to the ones that I get. I got them from Amazon and I'll put it in the video description. But these are great. They have a little rubber seal in it. You put that up, press down, and it locks that in tight. You can also reuse Grolsch bottles. Those are, it's a type of beer. If you can clean those out well, you could use those. But I've also found that yes, you can reuse these bottles. Because another common question that I would get about brewing kombucha was, can you reuse the bottles of GT kombucha? Some people call it Synergy, other people call it GTs. It's this kombucha that you can get in the supermarket pretty much anywhere, at least in the United States. And these are sturdy, thick glass bottles with nice wide mouth and these plastic lids. And yes, you can reuse these bottles for your second ferment of your kombucha. I was afraid to use them for a long time because I thought maybe these lids wouldn't lock in the carbonation, or maybe they would be easier to explode or harder to tell when they were ready. And I found it's actually handy. These plastic tops do seal, again, really well, and then they'll bulge just a little bit when they're getting a lot of carbonation built up. And that's when I can kind of feel the top of this and know what I'm getting into before I open it. like if I should step outside or at least over the sink, or if it's good to just crack one and hand it to my kid. I actually like these because it's the best of both worlds. I'm reusing something, it's in glass, but it also has a plastic lid that's flexible enough to tell me if what I'm getting into before I open it. And one other thing about bottling that I get asked a lot, because I talk about it a lot, is the plastic bottle method. That's what I call it. And I think I first heard Sandor Katz talk about the plastic bottle method. And this is reusing a plastic bottle for one of the drinks that you're going to be bottling. So from a gallon, I get about 7 of these bottles full for each batch. And I do either swing top or GTs, and then I do 1 plastic bottle. And the reason I'm doing 1 plastic bottle, and this is especially important when I'm brewing things that are really active and get really bubbly and can get overcarbonated, like kvass or tepache, which I'll link in the description to my videos on how I make those other fermented drinks. But once you have this bottled, you're gonna see that it's squishy. The plastic is flexible, so you can squish it in, even when it's full of liquid. As the carbonation builds up in this bottle, it will become more firm and harder to press the sides in. This is gonna be my litmus test for the rest of my bottles. As long as I'm bottling all the same liquid into each of these bottles, they should be relatively the same. So I'm going to press on the sides of this. I'm gonna walk by at 8 hours, 12 hours, and see if it's been enough time at my second fermentation to build up adequate carbonation inside this bottle as well as the others. And then I'll move them to the fridge. Also a way for me to kind of check in the fridge if things are getting over fermented because I haven't been drinking them fast enough. Again, if some of this stuff isn't making sense, you can watch my other video on how I brew, flavor, and bottle my Jun Kombucha, and it gives some more information on this as well. But the plastic bottle method is just that. It's using 1 plastic bottle and using that as your tester to see how carbonated things are, how much is built up in the bottle, and when you should move it to your fridge. All right, that's all I can think of for now. If you have more questions about brewing kombucha specifically, or just Jun or fermented drinks, leave them in the comments. I'll be happy to answer your questions. Thanks for being with me. I'm Lanny, and this was Preserving Today.